The neighborhood clubhouse in one of Los Angeles's most exclusive gated communities gleamed under soft chandelier lighting. Polished marble floors reflected rows of designer heels and tailored suits as residents gathered for the monthly Homeowners Association meeting. Outside, luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway, sleek Teslas, glossy Range Rovers, and brand-new German sedans, each one a silent declaration of status. At the center of it all stood the HOA president, clipboard in hand, posture stiff with authority. Tonight's agenda was supposedly about landscaping updates and pool renovations, but the real focus sat quietly in the back row, Keanu Reeves. He had arrived, as he always did, in the same aging sedan. The paint had faded under years of California sun. The bumper bore a faint scratch. The engine made a low, tired hum when it idled. Compared to the polished machines outside, it looked almost out of place, like a memory parked in a showroom of ambition. Whispers had started weeks ago. Some neighbors claimed the car lowered property values. Others questioned whether it violated the community aesthetic laws. It wasn't loud. It wasn't broken. It simply wasn't impressive. And in a neighborhood built on appearance, that was enough. Midway through the meeting, the president cleared her throat and adjusted her glasses. Her tone shifted from procedural to pointed. "Before we conclude," she said, glancing down at her clipboard, "we need to address a matter concerning vehicle standards." The room grew quieter. She gestured toward the window, where the old sedan sat beneath the streetlight. "This is a premium community. We maintain certain expectations. Some vehicles do not reflect that standard." A few restrained laughs fluttered across the room. Someone muttered, "Maybe it belongs in a museum." Another whispered, "Or a junkyard." The president continued, her voice smooth but cutting, "We cannot allow personal choices to diminish collective value." All eyes slowly turned toward Keanu. He didn't shift uncomfortably. He didn't argue. He simply sat there, hands folded, expression calm, almost detached. There was no embarrassment in his posture, no defensive tension in his jaw, just stillness. When the printed violation notice was placed in front of him, he glanced at it briefly and nodded once. "Understood," he said quietly. No explanation, no protest. The simplicity of his response felt almost unsettling. In a room accustomed to status battles and raised voices, his silence carried more weight than anger ever could. As the meeting adjourned, clusters of residents gathered near the exit, satisfied murmurs blending with the click of high heels against marble. The president looked pleased, believing she had preserved the integrity of the neighborhood. Outside, the old sedan waited patiently under the glow of a single street lamp, its worn surface reflecting faint golden light. Keanu walked toward it alone, the cool evening air brushing past him. He paused briefly before opening the driver's door, resting his hand on the roof as if greeting an old friend. Inside the clubhouse, they had seen rust, scratches, and fading paint. What they hadn't seen was history. The neighborhood always looked different at night. The polished driveways and trimmed hedges softened under the glow of warm streetlights, and the quiet hum of distant traffic replaced the daytime performance of wealth. Around 11 p.m., when most of the houses had gone dark, a single light flickered inside the old sedan parked near the curb. Keanu Reeves sat in the driver's seat, engine off, windows slightly cracked to let in the cool air. He wasn't scrolling through his phone. He wasn't going anywhere. He was simply there, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the dashboard as if listening to something only he could hear. Across the street, a teenage neighbor named Emily had stepped outside to take out the trash. She noticed him immediately. It wasn't unusual to see luxury cars coming and going at late hours, business dinners, airport runs, social events, but this was different. The car didn't move. The man inside didn't move either. Curiosity tugged at her. For weeks, she had heard the whispers about the old car. She had even overheard her parents agreeing that it didn't fit the image of the community. But tonight, under the quiet sky, it didn't look like an eyesore. It looked personal. From where she stood, she could see small details illuminated by the dashboard light. A worn leather steering wheel polished smooth from years of use. a tiny crack running through the corner of the radio display, a faded keychain dangling from the ignition, simple metal, scratched from time. On the passenger seat rested a folded jacket that looked older than most of the cars parked nearby. There was no clutter, no neglect. The car wasn't abandoned by pride. It was preserved by something else. Something careful. Emily hesitated before walking closer. Gravel crunched softly under her sneakers. She didn't want to intrude, but something about the stillness felt heavy. When she reached the driver's side window, she offered a small, awkward wave. Keanu looked up gently, as if returning from far away. He rolled the window down halfway. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to bother you. I see you sitting here sometimes." He offered a faint, polite smile. "You're not bothering me." She glanced at the dashboard, then back at him. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Why don't you just get a new car? I mean, after what happened at the meeting." There was no irritation in her voice, only genuine confusion. For a moment, he didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the passenger seat, then to the rear-view mirror. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt measured, thoughtful. Finally, he ran his thumb lightly across the steering wheel. "Some things," he said quietly, "aren't meant to be replaced." Emily frowned slightly, not fully understanding. He didn't elaborate. Instead, he reached up and adjusted the rear-view mirror, not to check behind him, but to look at something tucked into the corner of it. A small, faded photograph barely visible in the dim light. The street remained silent. No luxury engines roared. No voices echoed from a clubhouse. Just the soft night air moving through the trees. From inside her bedroom window later that night, Emily watched as he remained in the car for several more minutes. Not driving, not escaping, just remembering. The community saw an outdated vehicle parked among symbols of success. But what sat under that streetlight wasn't about status. It was about something he wasn't ready to let go of. The next evening, the air felt heavier, as if the neighborhood itself sensed something unspoken. The sky burned orange before fading into deep violet, and once again the old sedan sat beneath the familiar streetlight. Keanu Reeves was inside, but this time he wasn't alone for long. Emily approached more confidently than before, hands tucked into the sleeves of her hoodie. She had thought about his words all day. Some things aren't meant to be replaced. The sentence had followed her through school, through dinner, through the quiet moments before sleep. It didn't sound like someone defending a car. It sounded like someone protecting a memory. When she reached the driver's side, he noticed her immediately and rolled the window down without hesitation. She didn't ask permission this time. She simply said, "I think I understand a little but not completely." There was no accusation in her tone, only sincerity. Keanu studied her expression for a moment, as if deciding whether she was ready to hear the weight behind the metal and glass surrounding him. Then his eyes shifted to the dashboard, to the faint crack in the radio screen, to the worn stitching along the seat. "This car," he began quietly, "belonged to someone who saved my life more times than he ever realized." His voice was steady, but softer than usual. "We drove it everywhere. Long nights after auditions. Early mornings before sunrise. When I had nothing, he shared what he had. When I doubted myself, he reminded me who I was." The street seemed to grow stiller, as though even the wind leaned in to listen. "The last place I heard him laugh," he added, barely above a whisper, "was right here." Emily's eyes flickered to the passenger seat. Suddenly the worn leather didn't look old. It looked lived in. Keanu reached toward the visor and pulled down a folded slip of paper, edges yellowed with time. It was a hospital parking ticket. "I kept meaning to throw it away," he said gently, though it was clear he never intended to. "But it was the last drive we took together." His thumb brushed over the faded keychain. "Everyone thinks I keep this because I can't afford better. The truth is, I can't afford to forget." He leaned back slightly, staring through the windshield as if the past were projected onto the quiet street ahead. In his mind, the neighborhood disappeared. The polished homes dissolved into open highways and late-night diners. He remembered coffee cups rattling in the cup holder, music blasting through imperfect speakers, conversations about dreams that felt too big at the time. He remembered laughter that filled the car so completely it felt indestructible. And he remembered silence, the kind that followed hospital monitors and final goodbyes. Emily swallowed, the weight of her earlier curiosity turning into something else entirely. Regret, respect, understanding. She realized the community had reduced something sacred into a superficial complaint. What they had mocked as outdated was, in reality, irreplaceable. The scratch on the bumper wasn't neglect, it was a timestamp. The faded paint wasn't embarrassment, it was endurance. Keanu glanced at her one last time, offering a small, almost apologetic smile. Some people upgrade when things get old, he said. I hold on when things matter. As Emily walked back home, she looked at the row of flawless luxury vehicles lining the street. For the first time, they seemed strangely empty. Behind every polished surface might be something forgotten, but inside that aging sedan sat something rare in a world obsessed with replacing, loyalty that refused to fade. The next morning, the neighborhood woke up the way it always did. Automatic sprinklers hissing across emerald lawns, garage doors lifting in synchronized precision, luxury engines humming down spotless streets. But something invisible had shifted. Emily sat at her desk before school, staring at her phone. She hadn't slept much. The conversation from the night before echoed in her mind. The hospital parking ticket, the cracked radio, the sentence that wouldn't leave her alone. I can't afford to forget. After a long pause, she opened her social media app and began typing. She didn't mention his address. She didn't attack anyone. She simply told a story about a man being mocked for an old car and the reason he kept it. She posted it anonymously. No hashtags, no drama, just truth. Within hours, the post began to circulate. First among her friends, then among local community pages, then beyond. People reshared it with captions like, "We judge too fast." Others wrote, "You never know what someone is carrying." By afternoon, screenshots of the HOA violation notice appeared online. The phrase community aesthetic clause suddenly felt cold and shallow when placed next to the story of loyalty and loss. The comment section filled with a mix of outrage and reflection. Some criticized the HOA directly. Others admitted they'd been guilty of similar judgments in their own lives. By early evening, residents of the gated community began noticing the change. Neighbors who once whispered now avoided eye contact. A few quietly removed their own sarcastic comments from local message boards. The HOA president received emails, some calm, some angry, asking whether policies had crossed into cruelty. What had started as a minor enforcement issue was now a public conversation about empathy. The narrative had shifted. It wasn't about property value anymore. It was about values. That night's emergency HOA meeting felt very different from the previous one. The same chandelier lighting, the same polished marble floors, but the atmosphere was tense, fragile. Keanu Reeves entered without fanfare, dressed simply as always. No security, no entourage, just quiet presence. Conversations hushed as he took a seat in the back row again. The president's usual confidence seemed thinner now. Her clipboard held a little tighter in her hands. Before she could begin the agenda, a board member cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should revisit last month's vehicle concern." No one laughed this time. The room remained still. Someone from the middle row spoke up. "Maybe we were too quick to judge." Another added, "This community should stand for more than appearances." The tone wasn't aggressive, it was reflective, ashamed even. Keanu didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He simply listened. When the president finally addressed him, her voice lacked its previous sharpness. "Mr. Reeves," she began, "it seems there may have been a misunderstanding regarding the intent of our policy." The phrasing was cautious, but the message was clear. The violation notice, once handed out with subtle mockery, was now under reconsideration. Outside, under the same streetlight, the old sedan waited patiently, unchanged, unpolished, unapologetic. Inside the clubhouse, something far more significant had begun to transform. For the first time, the community wasn't debating standards of luxury. They were confronting standards of humanity. The final HOA meeting of the month drew a larger crowd than usual. Word had spread, not just about the story, but about the quiet shift that followed. The clubhouse no longer buzzed with smug confidence. Instead, there was a subdued tension, like a room waiting for something honest to happen. Outside, the familiar row of polished vehicles gleamed beneath the evening lights, and parked among them, unchanged and unashamed, sat the aging sedan. Its paint was still faded, the scratch on the bumper still visible. But now no one pointed, no one laughed. Inside, the HOA president stood at the front again, though her posture was noticeably softer. The usual agenda papers lay untouched for a moment as she cleared her throat. "Before we begin," she said carefully, "we'd like to address the prior vehicle citation." A hush fell over the room. Keanu Reeves sat quietly near the back, hands resting calmly in his lap. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't look resentful. He simply looked present. "The board has decided," she continued, "to formally withdraw the violation notice." A subtle exhale moved through the room. "We recognize that community standards should reflect more than appearances." It wasn't a dramatic apology, but it was sincere enough to carry weight. The president lowered her clipboard slightly before adding, "We hope to move forward with greater understanding." There was an unspoken expectation in the room. Some assumed Keanu might finally defend himself, maybe share the story publicly, maybe expose the board's insensitivity. Instead, he stood slowly and walked toward the front. His footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor. When he reached the podium, he didn't bring notes. He didn't bring evidence. He brought perspective. "I appreciate the reconsideration," he began, voice steady and measured. "But I never wanted this to become about a car." He paused briefly, scanning the room. Not accusing, not confrontational, just thoughtful. A neighborhood isn't defined by what's parked in the driveway. It's defined by how we treat the people who live here. His words weren't loud, but they landed deeply. He reached into his jacket and placed a small folder on the podium. "I've also been thinking," he continued, "our community park could use some renovation. New benches, better lighting, a safer play area." He slid the folder forward. "I'd like to fund the project." Murmurs rippled across the room, this time not with mockery, but surprise. The same man they had quietly judged for driving something beneath the standard was now investing in something above it. Not for recognition, not for leverage, simply because it mattered. He stepped away from the podium without waiting for applause, without seeking validation. The room remained silent for a few seconds longer than usual, as if everyone needed time to process what real dignity looked like. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the old sedan rolled slowly out of the community gates. The engine hummed steadily, unchanged by public opinion. Streetlights reflected off its worn surface like quiet badges of memory. Inside, Keanu drove with the same calm expression he always had. The car was never about wealth. It was never about rebellion. It was about remembrance. And in a neighborhood obsessed with upgrades, he had reminded them of something far more valuable. Character doesn't need polishing.